Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined once again by boxing journalist and renowned PED in sports expert, Gabe Montoya. Gabe, how you doing?
Doing all right, man. I'm hanging in there.
When we did the last of these discussions on the Conor Benn situation, I think I saw it being like a perfect trilogy, if you like. And now, having seen the latest ruling from the WBC and also the response from the British Boxing Board of Control, both of which we'll discuss in a moment, I think this could run and run. We don't seem particularly closer to getting a satisfying or a satisfactory conclusion to this mess. I'll talk about the WBC edict in more detail shortly, but what was your initial reaction? It was kind of preempted a little bit a couple of weeks ago. People said he was going to be quote unquote cleared by the sanctioning body. But what did you make of their edict and the rationale they used?
I was kind of disgusted by the WBC. Why even go to the trouble of starting a clean boxing program, getting VADA involved? If you're gonna then, when somebody tests positive, get involved and split hairs like this. It's my understanding this report is not looking at the second positive. They're looking at the first positive that happened in the clean boxing program. And the reason that they're doing that, and I think Dan Raphael pointed this out in his Substack reporting, is that the clean boxing program doesn't have strict liability in it. So, now the second positive, I think that agreement might have it because it was more, VADA training camp testing and that kind of agreement. But in the clean boxing program, there's this loophole that doesn't exist in the World Anti-Doping Agency or USADA or VADA. Strict liability just means, if you test positive for something, you are responsible for the thing that goes in your body. And you come up with all these other excuses, but ultimately you're going to be punished because it's your body. Yeah. So, it's there's a reason why there's so many lawyers in boxing. They love to find these loopholes. And I think that's what the WBC did. And to me, it just undermines VADA, it undermines clean sport, and it does a disservice to athletes who don't test positive for clomiphene because they're not on drugs.
Now, I'm going to read a section, probably not the only one during this conversation, but I'm going to read a section of the WBC's decision that they sent out as a press release, and also it's on their website if anyone wants to go and have a look. So they're talking about the investigation, and they said, I'm just trying to find the right part. It was not until early January of 2023 that the WBC Results Management Unit was able to undertake the full substantive analysis of Mr. Benn's arguments and defences. Now, I was reading this yesterday, and they basically said, and I'm trying to find the lines where they talked about it, they were looking into an explanation of contamination for quite some time, I think from September last year through to January. And only in the last 3 weeks did they submit the full nutritional plan that Ben had been adhering to, and their alternative explanation that he tested positive for clomiphene because of an overabundance of eggs in his diet. Now, what can we kind of surmise from the fact that they were looking at a different argument up until just 3 weeks ago? And not only that, but the fact that the WBC have come to their conclusion only 3 weeks after getting this evidence.
Well, I've had over the years, I've been writing about this since 2010 and covering it or paying attention to it since then. Over the years, athletes that have tested positive in stories I haven't been covering, and sometimes in stories I have been covering, have asked me what to do when they test positive. And I say, get yourself an experienced anti-doping lawyer. And that seems to be what Conor Benn did here. I mean, the fact that you're looking for an excuse, and then 3 weeks before this all comes out, you're like, we found it. I mean, how many eggs do you have to break to come up with a cover story? It just doesn't wash to me in terms of just Occam's razor. Guy's moving up in weight to an unnatural weight class. He tests positive for a drug twice that other athletes in other sports have been caught using over the years. That kind of says that it works. It's used, all the bodybuilders know exactly what this is for. It's to come off of a cycle after you've been taking an anabolic steroid or you've been taking testosterone. It balances out your estrogen. We all know what this is. like it's either he took that drug and got caught twice, or man, I was just bulking up to weight and I was eating a bunch of eggs, and wow, it turns out they put clomiphene in those to make the poultry, have more eggs. What just off the bat seems more plausible?
Sure. So I've just found the section I was looking for. So they said at the WBC, said his defense against the adverse findings centered on allegations of potential laboratory analysis failures and irregularities in connection with the analysis of his samples and the results of the results of the samples testing. Now, this has been completely thrown out by the WBC in the same press release. You know, they're not saying anything about the laboratory settings, which are used both by VADA and WADA, and they're completely ruling that out as an explanation. And then further down, it does say in early February of 2023, so that's a maximum of what, 3 weeks ago, Mr. Benn's team for the first time provided a detailed breakdown of Mr. Benn's diet and supplement consumption that could have directly affected the adverse finding. Now, I find that just baffling that they presented this evidence just 3 weeks ago, having pursued a different line of argument in all the months preceding, and now the WBC have come to a conclusion just 3 weeks later. They couldn't come to a conclusion within, I mean, maybe they could come to a conclusion, but it wasn't the one that was acceptable to all parties. We don't know. But they couldn't come to a conclusion they were willing to send out to the public just 3 weeks ago. And now everything's changed. It just seems almost unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. Believe your eyes. When something seems fishy, it generally is, and particularly in doping. It just, this whole time, and I know this is Benn's legal team that is handling this, but Eddie Hearn has been in the press constantly, you guys are going to be surprised. You're going to have to apologize. We're doing this, the science is really going to blow you guys away. And this is the science. It's like getting to the top level of Scientology and finding out, really, this is what it's about. It just doesn't wash in my book. I feel like Eddie Hearn has been doing kind of a charm offensive to move the Overton window from my guy tested positive to, well, the BBC knew, and or the BBOC knew and UCAD knew, and why didn't they do anything? And it's like everybody else's fault except for the dude who tested positive twice, and the people who tried to have that fight happen. I was listening to an interview with Gareth Davies before we came on air, and he let out that it was Greg Mazzulli, who runs the Association of Boxing Commissions in the U.S., told Eddie Hearn that, or at least had intimated to Gareth that if they had tried to move that fight forward, they would have never let Eddie promote in the U.S. again. That's how serious everyone takes this. And so they've gone this other route and it's the same route that all athletes do. Lamont Peterson's people, to this day, I believe, I haven't called them today, but the last conversation I had with them, they were still saying that the samples had been switched and that it was actually Amir Khan's samples that had tested positive and there was some old switcheroo. They always go after everything but yourself, because the guy at the center of it is saying, I'm innocent, and he's not relenting on that. And until he does, this is where we're going to be at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess two of the biggest questions that came to mind, if we accept the overabundance of eggs, as the WBC, I think, called it, is a plausible explanation, is why has he never tested positive for clomiphene previously, if eggs have always, had such a dominant role in his regimen? But also, clomiphene is, prohibited in the UK for use on chickens. It's not allowed to be used by UK farmers. So surely tracing where those particular eggs came from shouldn't be that difficult, because it's not come from the local supermarket.
Right. And also, okay, you came up with your receipts that show you bought a bunch of eggs. Did you buy them for everybody in training camp? Or is there like a circle next to it, these are only for Conor, Like, it just make sense. At least Canelo, he came with receipts for where he got his, contaminated meat. But then he entered into VADA 365 testing, not the clean boxing program, but like test me regularly all year. And he took the hair follicle sample, which, detects long-term use. And he was cleared. Conor has done none of those things, or neither of those things. Instead, as you pointed out, he went one way, and then They obviously got a toehold on eggs and clomiphene and went, let's go that way. And, there's 4 sanctioning bodies here. The WBC is the only one with a drug testing program. They kind of went to it's like venue shopping almost, is how it feels. They went to the WBC, said, focus in on this first test. Or maybe they said that, maybe they didn't, but that's what the WBC did. And so there's now a precedent. We'll clear you, we'll rank you. What the WBC is basically saying is, if you're not able to go get a license in the UK, shop around in the United States and do a fight here or wherever, and we'll sanction it. We'll dip our beak into those into those purses and take our little 3%. We have no problems with that. And then they're going to try to have it both ways by saying, well, VADA did nothing wrong. Yeah, you're right. VADA didn't do anything wrong. It's the WBC that's doing something wrong here.
And harming VADA's reputation as a result, because although they
100%.
uphold that reputation on the surface in the press release, they're also saying, we're going to ignore what you found, or we're going to allow someone to circumvent your ruling anyway.
Every time they do this, they reach over into VADA's mouth and, metaphorically pull a tooth out. Because, VADA is not an adjudicator. All they can do is catch you. And they have a very stringent policy and how they do that, or a protocol and how they do that. But every time you undermine them like this, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool PED guy. I care about this stuff. Yesterday, I was just like, should I just stop caring about this? Am I the fool in all this? I remember a long time ago, I won't say who they are, but everybody that watches this video will know who they are. A very famous boxer I was interviewing. And when we were done interviewing and the recorder was off, they said, oh, that whole PED thing you're doing, you're never going to clean up the sport. It's always been dirty and it'll always be dirty. And I just kind of always think about that quote. Lou DiBella, although he denies it now, once said to me, it was calling him about something else. And he said, oh yeah, by the way, it was when I'd written that story about New York, Nevada, and the TE ratio, the 6-to-1 TE ratio loophole. And I was calling Lou to get a number. And Lou said, oh yeah, that story you wrote, yeah, nobody cares. Sport's dirty. It always will be. Publicly, he'll act like he's an anti-doping guy, but he's promoting John Pascal's fight. That guy tested positive twice for EPO. If you want to know what EPO looks like, watch the back end of De La Hoya Mosley 2, where Shane Mosley's got EPO. He's trained all through the camp with it, injecting it into his system, into his stomach, and then he comes back in the second half of the fight because he's got more energy, because that's what EPO does. And Lou DiBella is promoting that fight. March 16th, John Pascal's coming back. He didn't do a Uravada. He didn't give up where he got the drugs from. If you want to get rid of drugs in boxing, Freddie Roach says you got to get rid of the strength and conditioning coach, but I say get rid of the enablers who pay for these fights and who talk out of both sides of their mouth, who say, I'm for clean sport, and then turn around and promote dirty sport or dirty athletes. It's just, it's very frustrating at this point where I'm at.
I agree. I just want to read a little bit from the British Boxing Board of Control statement from yesterday. I think the General Secretary, Robert Smith, was inundated with interview requests after the WBC's ruling, understandably so. And it's just interesting because you talked about the strict liability loophole in the clean boxing program. And they kind of allude to that here in the statement. So the first thing they point out is that they've not been provided with any evidence submitted on Mr. Benn's behalf. So the so-called 170-page dossier that was submitted to the WBC for this investigation, the Board of Control here in the UK haven't seen that. They said WBC wishes to make it clear that it respects the WBC, but there's no but. Sorry, that's my but. The WBC is a sanctioning body and not a governing body, which is very true. The BBB of C was the governing body with whom Mr. Benn was licensed at the material time, and as such, any alleged anti-doping violation should be dealt with in accordance with its rules and regulations. And we should point out that if Conor Benn wants to fight here in the UK, unless he takes out a license with a less reputable organisation, he will need to, at some point, apply anew for his British Boxing Board of Control licence, which we know he handed back a little while ago, or chose not to renew. I'm not sure which of the two it was. Um,
Hearn seems to say it was not related to this, that it was some sort of other thing, but never says what that other thing was. And Ben didn't bother showing up to the hearing. So I don't know if his lawyer was like, if you don't show up, they can't punish you for anything.
yeah, I think we're often told about confidentiality clauses when you probe too deeply into the detail of these
Sure.
things. Unfortunately, I'm sure you're well aware.
Hmm.
So just at the end here, they say the UK anti-doping rules make clear what conduct constitutes an anti-doping rule violation as defined in those rules and in the World Anti-Doping Code. And that's correct because the British Boxing Board of Control rules, including the anti-doping code, are available on their website. I had a look when this first broke, last year. And specifically set out the circumstances in which such violations can be committed by way of strict liability. Now, I don't think that wording's been used by accident, neither has its placement at the very end of their statement. I think
Hmm.
they're quite clearly saying there, we abide by the strict liability protocol, even though the WBC do not. And if the same evidence is presented to us, perhaps we won't come to the same conclusion.
That's why I say it's venue shopping. If your goal is to clear your name and you're like, I've got science behind me, I've got this 270-page report and all these experts, why are you going to a sanctioning body and not the guys that have jurisdiction over your license? It's just clear that you're trying to move the Overton window in the public of like, he's not really dirty. He's just kind of, it's been contamination, or maybe it's VADA. You're just moving it so that we can get to a Pacquiao fight or whatever it is that you're going to do.
Perhaps it also puts more pressure on the British Boxing Board of Control if another respected body, who they say they respect in their statement, has already cleared Conor Benn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do, is a pressure campaign. That's what I was saying. Like, Eddie Hearn's doing his media charm offensive this whole time, blaming everybody but his guy, and now you have this, the reputable WBC saying, oh, we're fine, we can sanction him, and they're hoping that that'll push UCAD. I think UCAD needs to be, or the BBOC. These guys all need to be the bad guy here and be like, yeah, you don't get around this. It's strict liability. It was in your system. You haven't proved it. You haven't even tried to prove it to us that this other excuse works. I think they should slam him for it. And I'm not the most punitive guy in the world, but the behavior here it doesn't show any respect for the letter of the law. It's just, to me, you're just trying to get around things using a loophole, and that can't be rewarded. At least with Canelo, like I said, the guy took steps to try to show us. I would have preferred that he stayed in VADA 365 for his whole career. He did a year, but he still does testing. It's interesting. Like back in 2012, where I really made kind of my bones. From 2010 to 2012, I'd written like 25 pieces on various aspects of doping in the sport, and the administrators that let it happen. And then I did this like 6-week stretch where I broke like 5 stories in 6 weeks. And I was doing a lot of interviews at that time, and I would always call it a period of education, that we're boxing fans are learning about all this stuff. We don't know about the drugs. We don't know about the protocols and procedures and the administrators. But I think the fighters have learned, and the administrators and promoters have learned the wrong lessons. Floyd Mayweather never did VADA testing. He didn't do 365 testing. He tested twice a year when he decided testing would begin. I think he learned that lesson, in my opinion, from Lance Armstrong. But the other, all the other fighters do that too. That unless you're in the WBC, some guys just don't get in that program and we're not ranked by the WBC. They use all the other loopholes. They use the other 3 sanctioning bodies and not have to do testing. There's just various ways, and I think here, guys are, maybe they learned the wrong lesson from Canelo. Let's come up with a cover story. We'll get a bunch of guys to say that we're all good. But they won't do the other steps, the hard part, which is testing for a year when you don't know it's coming, and doing the hair follicle test. Those are 2 things that are established that work, and Conor Benn needs to do both of those things. Right now, everybody's just learned in this period of education that we're still in, I think, how to better cheat and how to help your guy get away with it.
And that's the kind of negative implications for the sport, of which there are many, What do you see kind of panning out with Conor Benn specifically now? Because best will in the world, he's not a draw anywhere other than the UK. You know, he's not a world champion yet. He's built his reputation, his profile here in the UK. Currently can't fight here. We're not sure if there's any attempt to regain that board of control license. Do you see that happening at some point?
Do you think Pacquiao versus Conor Benn would sell in Dubai or Saudi?
Sure.
I bet you that's where they go. You know, Gareth actually mentioned that Sean Gibbons, who's connected to the Pacquiao camp, and somebody else in the Pacquiao camp said that there are actually serious talks about that fight happening, Benn versus Pacquiao. Obviously, it's not as well, you know, it's not as big a fight as it could have been if he'd have beaten Eubank and then you try to lure Pacquiao out of retirement. But, you know, show me a fighter that's made as much money as Manny Pacquiao, I'll show you a guy who needs money. You know, so he's probably going to come back. You know, he's in politics, and politicians always need money. So, you know, I think that they'll venue shop. I mean, Hearn's done it before, right? With Chavez Jr. He had a positive, and then they went to Arizona, where you just can do whatever you want. So, you know, there's just there's no honor here. I think it's just it's a flesh sport. These are flesh peddlers, and they're going to find the place that they can sell their flesh.
What have you kind of perceived as the general reaction online and so on to this, you know, WBC decision? Because for me, for the most part, there's been a lot of kind of humour, but also not much in the way of support from what I've seen so far for Conor Benn.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just think it's, you know, I mean, people still call Canelo. You know, once you test positive, it's really hard to go back. And at the very least, I think Canelo moved things in his favor by doing the steps I mentioned. With Conor Benn, it's taken so long that even, you know, Eddie Hearn's voice has been out there, but everybody else's voice, you know how it is in the, you know, in the webosphere. There's so many different podcasts and everybody talking about it. I think everybody feels that he's guilty, and the behavior isn't doing anything to change it. And when the eggs came out, I mean, it holds as much water as the tea with Oscar Valdez. You know, at least I know, I can't really divulge much. I know Valdez was trying to take steps to get further testing done and clear his name, and it just didn't work out. He didn't, you know, get the test, but it wasn't like he failed the test. I'm not saying that, but you know, it is hard to get that hair follicle test done and all that stuff. So, you know, it's what I think needs to happen is that needs to become available. Sort of the way carbon isotope ratio testing used to be done, or it still is done, and everywhere else but VADA. It used to be that if you tested somebody and you did the TE ratio test and they failed it, you're like, well, maybe this guy's on testosterone. Let's do carbon isotope ratio testing to kind of confirm that. VADA instead put that test up front and said, let's just cut out the middleman. What I think needs to happen with the hair follicle test is that it needs to be brought in as a confirmatory test on the regular, and then eventually just moved into the panel as the science, you know, as more data supports that this is good science. I think that's what needs to happen. But with Benn, I just think he's got a long road to hoe, you know, and maybe they get to that next fight. You know, to me, all that needs to happen for him is he needs to get in that next fight and win it. And winning usually cures everything for people. There will always be the naysayers, but, you know, you can just, it's boxing, you can move forward. I mean, you know, John Pascal had tested positive twice for EPO, and he's getting a title shot in his next fight. So, you know.
The whole basis of this defense, whether it's focused on contamination or then later on diet, seems to be he would never knowingly, and he's said this himself, knowingly take a banned substance. But that goes right against the protocol of strict liability, because you don't have to know you're taking it. Now, contamination's a different thing because it's beyond your control. But if you've imbibed it to your body, then that is what strict liability is all about. There are no excuses, that seems to be. But then this ruling puts all that into doubt.
Well, that's, I mean, you could test, you could Google search every athlete that's tested positive and then made a statement about it. And I never knowingly is always there. It's almost like a form, you know, and you just put your name and the drug in there. It's just very lawyerly to me, this whole thing. That's why it's like, you know, I'm gonna turn, you know, I'm gonna make everybody apologize, and I'm so clear cut. And then you're using all this language that's very, you know, and the WBC not talking about the second test. Yeah, what about that one? What about the one that was, you know, the second time that he tested? How many eggs was this man eating? And is that good for you? I thought that would, you know, bad for your cholesterol. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, it makes lawyerly sense. It's a cover story, but it's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't make a lot of. It doesn't wash with me at all, I guess.
Well,
So
we shall
I
see.
don't know what they're going to do with it. You know, I think, yeah, I'm not sure where it goes from here.
Well, we'll see how it continues to pan out, and if the Boxing Board of Control do ultimately launch their own investigation, I guess they'll need that, you know, similar evidence to the WBC were given to do that. So maybe we'll come back again in a month or two, and we'll see where we are then. Hopefully in a more positive light.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, hopefully we're less positive, as as the case may be. You know, and just, you know, one last match. I know Lou comes on your you guys do interviews.
Sure.
It's interesting the amount of, he's one of the few people that I will talk to now and again. He'll just call me out of the blue. And as soon as I texted him, hey man, I want to go on the record about Jean Pascal and why you're promoting this fight, radio silence. It's real strange, Lou. So call me, buddy.
On that note, I really appreciate your time as always, Gabe. And yeah, let's do it again soon. Hopefully about something different, but you know, similar. Yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah, this is, you know, I've got my niche and my way to help, and I'm always happy to, man. So hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All right, man. Peace.